Imagine this. You're locked away for life in a massive fortified prison. Towering 30-foot walls surround you, made of concrete reinforced with thick iron bars. Armed guards keep watch from tall towers 24/7. Beneath your feet, solid mountain rock prevents any tunnels. There is no way out. Only one question remains. Would you accept your fate or risk everything for freedom? Today's story is about two prisoners who chose the second option, a story of determination, cunning, betrayal, and an escape that shocked the entire world. This is the true story of the escape from Clinton Correctional Facility, also known as Dannemora Prison, one of America's toughest maximum security prisons. Unlike most high-security prisons, hidden far from civilization, Dannemora Prison sits right in the middle of a quiet town in upstate New York. A town with barely 5,000 residents, unknowingly living beside some of the most dangerous criminals in America. The prison was built like a fortress, walls 9 meters high and 2 meters thick, reinforced with iron rods. Guard towers positioned at every corner, surrounded by rugged mountains, making digging impossible. An escape was not just difficult, it was considered impossible, or so they thought. One of the men planning to escape was Richard Matt, a convicted murderer with a terrifying past. In 1997, Richard kidnapped his boss, locked him in the trunk of a car, and drove around torturing him for 24 hours, trying to force him to reveal where he had hidden his money. The old man eventually died from the abuse. Richard then dismembered the body using a saw and dumped it into the Niagara River. Afterward, he fled to Mexico where he committed another murder. Captured and imprisoned there for 9 years, he was eventually extradited back to the US and locked up at Dannemora. Richard was manipulative, charming, and extremely dangerous. He obsessed over escape and was determined to find a way, even if it took years. Richard's cell neighbor was David Sweat, a criminal with a long record and a life sentence for killing a police officer. Unlike Richard, David was quiet and technical. Years of working in the prison workshops had made him an expert in carpentry, wiring, and maintenance. He knew the prison's infrastructure inside out, especially the hidden areas behind the walls. Together, they made the perfect team. Richard, the manipulator. David, the engineer. Their first idea was simple: open their cells and sneak out to the yard where the walls were furthest from the watchtowers. But there was a problem. The cell doors were locked with specialized screws that could only be opened with a rare tool, a Torx screwdriver. How would they get one? Enter Joyce Mitchell, a sewing shop supervisor at the prison. Joyce was unhappy in her marriage, lonely and vulnerable. Richard, the manipulator, saw his opportunity. He charmed Joyce, pretending to fall in love with her. Little by little, he asked her for small favors: a pair of LED reading glasses, some extra food, nothing suspicious. And then he escalated, asking her for inappropriate pictures to ensure she couldn't betray him without risking public humiliation. Joyce, fully under Richard's control, agreed to smuggle the Torx screwdriver bit into the prison. Using a clever trick, Richard hid the screwdriver bit inside a pair of headphones to pass through the metal detectors undetected. But once they tried to open the cell doors, they failed. The locks were too strong. The first plan collapsed, but they didn't give up. If they couldn't open the doors, they would create a new exit. David suggested targeting the small air vents at the back of their cells. Beyond the vents was an area known as the catwalks, tunnels filled with pipes and wires that connected the prison cells. David had worked there during maintenance jobs and knew the layout. To cut through the vents, they needed hacksaw blades. Once again, Richard turned to Joyce. She smuggled the blades into the sewing workshop, and with the help of another corrupt guard, Gene Palmer, Richard sneaked them into the cells. For 3 weeks, Richard and David carefully cut through the vents during noisy times when the prison was loud and busy. Finally, David managed to break through into the catwalks. Richard took a little longer, but they were one step closer to freedom. At night, David crawled into the catwalks, exploring the prison's underbelly. He discovered a massive network of underground tunnels carrying steam pipes, water heaters, and power lines. However, there was a problem. The tunnels were completely sealed, no exit anywhere. They needed another plan. Nearby, there was a power station supplying steam to the prison. David realized that if they could follow the steam pipes, they might find a way out. Night after night, David crawled through the tunnels, tracing the pipes. Finally, he found a weak spot, a concrete wall that wasn't heavily fortified like the main prison walls. Using the hacksaw blades, he slowly began to dig through it. Progress was painfully slow until David stumbled upon a red toolbox left behind by workers. Inside were real tools, including a hammer. With the hammer, digging became faster. After 2 weeks of digging, David broke through the wall, only to find another wall, the real outer prison wall. It was the same 2-meter thick reinforced concrete. Heartbreaking. But they didn't give up. Every night they took turns digging with the hammer, just like the movie The Shawshank Redemption, working hour after hour, making tiny progress. One night, they discovered a drill inside the red toolbox, but there was no drill bit. Richard once again manipulated Joyce into smuggling drill bits hidden inside frozen meat, using his friendship with guard Gene Palmer to get it through. However, by the time the drill bits arrived, the toolbox had mysteriously disappeared. They were back to using the hammer. On May 4, 2015, everything changed. David noticed that the massive steam pipe next to them, which was usually hot, had cooled down. Summer had arrived. The steam system was shut off. The pipe was about 60 centimeters in diameter, big enough to crawl through. If they could cut into it, it could lead straight under the prison walls. David immediately began cutting into the pipe using the hacksaw blades. It took weeks of slow, dangerous work. Eventually, he made a hole, crawled inside, and confirmed that the pipe went under the prison's main wall. At last, a real path to freedom. Inside the narrow steam pipe, David slowly sawed open another hole after crossing under the wall. It was brutal, suffocating work, but after 3 more weeks, he emerged into a city sewer tunnel. The smell was terrible, but to David, it was the sweetest scent in the world: freedom. On June 6, 2015, Richard and David left their cells. They placed dummies made of clothes under their blankets to fool the guards during bed checks. They crawled through the vents, into the tunnels, through the steam pipe, and finally into the sewers. Richard, heavier than David, almost got stuck in the pipe, but they managed to pull him through using a bedsheet. When they surfaced on the street, their contact, Joyce Mitchell, was supposed to be waiting with a getaway car. But Joyce panicked at the last minute and checked herself into a hospital. They were on their own. Before they ever crawled through tunnels or cut through pipes, Richard and David fought a different kind of battle, a mental and emotional battle inside the prison. Life in Dannemora wasn't just about being locked in a cell. It was about surviving brutal conditions, constant surveillance, violent inmates, and the daily grind that slowly broke even the strongest spirits. To succeed in their escape plan, Richard and David needed more than tools and blueprints. They needed patience, manipulation, and extreme secrecy. They had to act like normal prisoners every single day. Attending workshops, behaving calmly, avoiding suspicion from guards and fellow inmates. Any wrong move could mean being caught, and spending the rest of their lives in solitary confinement. Richard used his charisma to control people like Joyce Mitchell and Gene Palmer without ever raising alarms. David hid his nightly explorations so perfectly that even with hundreds of guards and cameras, no one noticed a thing. Imagine carrying a secret like that for almost an entire year, knowing that one slip, one nervous look, or one wrong word could end everything. This invisible mental pressure was even more exhausting than the physical digging. Their real escape didn't just happen on June 6th when they crawled out. It started long before in their minds, when they decided to outsmart a system built to crush them by 5 a.m. Guards discovered the empty cells. The prison was thrown into chaos. An emergency manhunt began immediately. Over 1,500 law enforcement officers, helicopters, K-9 units, and even the FBI joined the search. The two fugitives, hiding in the dense forest, decided to split up to avoid being captured together. On June 26, 2015, 21 days after the escape, Richard Matt was spotted near a hunting cabin. When cornered by police, he raised a gun, which was actually empty. Police opened fire, killing him. 2 days later, on June 28th, David Sweat was captured near the Canadian border. When confronted by a border agent, David tried to run. He was shot in the leg and captured alive. Joyce Mitchell was arrested and sentenced to 4 years in prison and fined $86,000. Guard Gene Palmer was fined $5,000 and served 6 months in prison for assisting unintentionally. David Sweat received an additional life sentence and remains behind bars today. The escape from Dannemora shocked America. It exposed massive flaws in prison security and inspired TV shows, documentaries, and endless debate. It remains one of the most daring and elaborate prison breaks in U.S. history, a story where 2 men challenged the impossible and almost succeeded.